The coastal air carried salt and jasmine through the open window of Morrison and Associates Title Company, but I barely noticed. My attention was fixed on the conference room across the hallway, where Richard, my stepfather of 12 years, sat beside a blonde woman with an iPad, gesturing enthusiastically as he described his beachfront property. The main deck can accommodate up to 200 guests, Richard said, his voice carrying that practiced confidence he'd perfected during his years as a regional sales director. We'll string cafe lights from the pergola to the guest house. The ceremony at sunset, reception under the stars. It'll be featured in every wedding magazine on the West Coast. The wedding planner, identified by her leather portfolio embossed with enchanted moments events, nodded approvingly. And the sale closes today. Your daughter must be thrilled to have this secured 8 weeks before her wedding. She deserves it, Richard said firmly. My stepdaughter never appreciated what she had. Too busy with her little nonprofit job to maintain a property like this. Madison will actually use it properly. I shifted in my chair in the waiting area, the leather portfolio on my lap containing documents Richard hadn't seen in 7 years. Documents he didn't know existed. Documents that were about to unravel everything he'd orchestrated over the past 6 months. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison, my stepsister. Dad says closing is almost done. Can't believe I'm getting married at the beach house. You should be happy for me instead of being bitter. I didn't respond. There was no point. Not yet. 3 months earlier, the certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. I'd been reviewing grant applications for the Literacy Foundation where I worked as program director when my assistant brought in the mail. The return address made my stomach drop. Coastal Realty Partners, one of the most aggressive luxury brokers in Southern California. Notice of intent to sell. The header read. The property, 4287 Sanctuary Cove Road, my grandmother's beach house. The house where I'd spent every summer from age 6 to 18. The house my grandmother had transferred into an irrevocable trust with me, as sole beneficiary 3 months before her death, specifically to protect it from my mother's tendency to defer to Richard in all financial matters. I called the number listed. A cheerful voice answered, Coastal Realty Partners, this is Vanessa speaking. I received a notice about a property sale, I said carefully. 4287 Sanctuary Cove Road. I wasn't aware this property was on the market. Oh yes, the Lawson property. Are you calling about scheduling a showing? We've already received multiple offers. The seller is hoping to close quickly. Who's the seller listed as? Papers rustled. Richard Lawson. He's been wonderful to work with. His daughter's getting married, and he's using the proceeds as a wedding gift. Isn't that sweet? I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. Richard had somehow listed my property for sale. My property, protected in an irrevocable trust established by my grandmother, specifically because she'd never trusted him. She'd seen how he'd convinced my mother to refinance her paid-off house, to cash out her retirement, to co-sign loans for his failed business ventures. She'd made sure the beach house, her life's greatest investment, would never be touched by him. I pulled the trust documents from my home safe that evening. My grandmother had been thorough. The Sanctuary Cove Trust, established in 2015, naming me as sole beneficiary. Irrevocable. The property couldn't be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without my explicit written consent as the beneficiary. My grandmother's attorney, Patricia Hernandez, was listed as trustee. I called Patricia the next morning. I was wondering when you'd contact me, Patricia said, her voice warm but concerned. I received notice that someone's attempting to sell the Sanctuary Cove property. I've been monitoring the situation. Can he actually do this, legally? No, he has no authority whatsoever, but that doesn't mean he won't try. I've seen people forge signatures, claim power of attorney, produce fake documents. The question is, how do you want to handle it? What are my options? We can file an immediate injunction, stop the sale before it progresses. Clean, simple, done. Or, Patricia paused, or we let it proceed far enough to gather evidence of fraud. If Richard is forging documents or misrepresenting ownership, we catch him in the act, make it impossible for him to claim ignorance or accident. That's risky. It is, but it also ensures this never happens again. Right now, if we stop the sale, he'll claim he made an honest mistake. He'll try again in 6 months, a year. If we catch him attempting to complete fraudulent paperwork at closing, with witnesses, with a paper trail, that's criminal fraud. That ends the attempts permanently. I thought about Richard's escalating financial pressure over the years, the suggestions that I sell the beach house and invest in his consulting business, the comments about how I was wasting the property by only visiting a few times a year, the way he'd started referring to it as family property at gatherings. Let's gather evidence. I said. The setup over the next 10 weeks, Patricia and I watched Richard build his fraud. We received courtesy copies of every document filed with the title company. Each one was a masterpiece of deception. First came the purchase agreement, Richard Lawson, as property owner, agreeing to sell 4,287 Sanctuary Cove Road for $2.3 million to Gregory and Simone Castellano, a tech entrepreneur couple relocating from Seattle. Then the preliminary title report, which should have immediately flagged the trust ownership. Somehow Richard had produced documents claiming the trust had been dissolved, and the property transferred to him as successor trustee. These are sophisticated forgeries, Patricia noted during one of our calls. He's either working with someone who knows real estate law, or he's done extensive research. The closing date was set for June 14th. 3 days ago, I'd received Madison's call. "Oh my God, have you heard?" Madison's voice was breathless with excitement. "Dad sold the beach house. Well, technically it's still closing, but basically sold, and he's giving me the entire $2.3 million as a wedding gift. That's generous," I managed. "I know, right? Trevor and I are going to buy a house in Malibu. But here's the best part. Dad's letting me use the beach house for the wedding. The sale doesn't close until the day after, so we get it for the ceremony. 3 weeks from now. Can you believe the timing?" I could believe it. Richard had orchestrated the dates precisely. Wedding on June 13th. Closing on June 14th. Maximum emotional impact. Minimum chance for interference. "I'm sending you an invitation," Madison continued. "I know things have been weird between us, but you should come. It's at the beach house. Well, I guess it's not really yours anymore, but you know what I mean. It'll be beautiful." The invitation arrived 2 days later. Cream cardstock, gold embossing, a watercolor illustration of the beach house deck at sunset. The closing now. I sat in Morrison and Associates title company, listening to Richard describe wedding logistics, with the same confidence he'd once used to pitch timeshare investments. The conference room door opened. A woman in her 50s emerged, carrying a leather folder identical to mine. Catherine Morrison, the closing agent. She'd been carefully selected by Patricia, a 20-year veteran known for meticulous attention to detail and absolute adherence to legal protocol. "Miss Lawson," Catherine approached me. "We're ready for you." Richard's head snapped toward the waiting area. His face cycled through confusion, annoyance, and finally forced pleasantness. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Catherine said, consulting her notes, "Miss Lawson's presence is required. There are some questions about the property ownership that need clarification." The wedding planner gathered her materials. "I'll just step out. Please stay," I said quietly, standing. "This won't take long." We moved into the conference room. The Castellanos were already seated. Gregory, late 40s with salt and pepper hair, and Simone, wearing a Patagonia vest over a designer blouse. They looked confused but patient. Richard remained standing. "Catherine, I don't understand why my stepdaughter is here. The property ownership is clearly documented. That's what we need to discuss." Catherine opened her folder, spreading documents across the conference table. "Mr. Lawson, you've represented yourself as the owner of 4,287 Sanctuary Cove Road. You've provided what appear to be dissolution documents for the Sanctuary Cove Trust, along with a property transfer deed, naming yourself as the recipient." "That's correct." Richard's voice was steady, but I noticed his hand tightening on the chair back. "Except these documents are fraudulent." The room went silent. Gregory Castellano leaned forward. "I'm sorry, what?" Catherine pulled out another set of documents. The originals I'd provided. "The Sanctuary Cove Trust is an irrevocable trust, established in 2015, by Margaret Chen, the previous owner of the property. Upon Mrs. Chen's death in 2016, the property passed to the sole beneficiary named in the trust, her granddaughter Emma Lawson." She gestured to me. "That's impossible," Richard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "The trust was dissolved when Margaret died. Irrevocable trusts cannot be dissolved, except under very specific circumstances, none of which apply here." Catherine's voice was professional but firm. "The trust documents are registered with the county. The property deed is clear. Miss Emma Lawson is the legal owner of this property, and has been since 2016. Simone Castellano turned to her husband. "Gregory, did your attorney review the title?" "The preliminary report showed clear title," Gregory said, his own confusion evident. "I don't understand how Mr. Lawson provided falsified documentation." Catherine pulled out more papers. "These are the documents he submitted, claiming trust dissolution. I've compared them to the actual registered trust documents. The signatures are forged, the notary stamp is fake, the file numbers reference cases that don't exist. The wedding planner had gone pale, slowly sliding her chair back from the table. Richard's face was red. This is ridiculous. My wife and I have maintained that property for years. Maintenance doesn't establish ownership, a new voice said from the doorway. Patricia Hernandez entered, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a briefcase. I'm Patricia Hernandez, attorney for the Sanctuary Cove Trust and its beneficiary. I'm also the court-appointed trustee. She placed her briefcase on the table, extracting a thick folder. I have here the original trust documents, signed and notarized in 2015, county records of the property deed transfer in 2016, copies of every communication I've had with the title company over the past 10 weeks, monitoring this attempted sale, and she pulled out a final document, a formal complaint filed this morning, with the district attorney's office charging Richard Lawson with real estate fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of property, valued over $1 million. Richard sat down heavily. The wedding planner stood abruptly. I think I should leave. Actually, Patricia said calmly, we may need your statement. You witnessed Mr. Lawson representing himself as the property owner. You heard him discuss using the property for his daughter's wedding and distributing the sale proceeds as a gift. That establishes intent to benefit from the fraud. Madison, I'd been so focused on Richard, I hadn't thought about her involvement. She didn't know, I said quietly. My stepsister didn't know about the fraud. Patricia glanced at me, one eyebrow raised, but nodded. We'll verify that, but if you're willing to make that statement, it may keep her from being charged as an accessory. Gregory Castellano stood, extending his hand to me. Miss Lawson, I apologize for any role we played in this. Our attorney will be hearing from us about the title search failure. If you ever do decide to sell the property, please contact us directly. We'd still be interested at fair market value. Simone added, we have friends getting married in August who are desperate for a beach venue. If you're open to renting it, I can give you their contact information. Might help you recoup some of what this mess has cost you. They left, Catherine providing them with copies of the documentation that would support their legal claims against Richard for wasted time and expenses. When they were gone, only Richard, Patricia, Catherine, the wedding planner, and I remained. Catherine methodically sorted the documents into 3 piles. Mr. Lawson, I'm required by law to report attempted real estate fraud. These documents will be forwarded to the district attorney, the California Department of Real Estate, and the State Bar. Since you represented yourself as having legal authority, you didn't possess. I want to call my lawyer, Richard said hoarsely. That's your right, Patricia agreed. I should mention that attempted theft of property over $1 million is a felony in California, punishable by up to 3 years in state prison. The forgery charges are additional. If convicted on all counts, you're looking at significant prison time and permanent felony record. The wedding planner finally found her voice. What about the wedding? Madison has 200 guests arriving in 3 weeks. I looked at Richard, this man who'd spent 12 years dismissing my career, my choices, my inheritance from a grandmother he'd never respected. Who'd called me ungrateful when I wouldn't sell the beach house to fund his business ventures? Who'd told my mother I was selfish for keeping a property I barely used instead of helping family? Who'd just tried to steal $2.3 million from me to buy his daughter's love with a Malibu house and a magazine-worthy wedding? The wedding can proceed, I said. Everyone turned to look at me. Under specific conditions, I continued. Richard makes a full written confession to the fraud attempt. He signs documentation, acknowledging my sole ownership of the property. He agrees to pay all legal fees, mine, Patricia's, and the Castellanos, and he publicly tells Madison the truth about what he tried to do. And in exchange, Patricia asked, her expression carefully neutral, I'll consider not pressing criminal charges. I'll allow Madison to use the beach house for her wedding, at the standard rental rate of $15,000, which she'll pay directly to me, and Richard never contacts me about the property again, ever. Richard's jaw worked. You'd charge your own sister, stepsister, I corrected. And yes, because this is my business, my asset, my inheritance from someone who loved me enough to protect it from exactly this situation. Madison gets a fair market rental rate, same as anyone else. She's lucky I'm offering it at all after what you've done. The wedding planner was typing rapidly on her iPad. The rental rate is actually quite reasonable for a beachfront property that size. If Madison agrees, I can process the contract today. Patricia pulled out her laptop. I'll draft the confession, an acknowledgement now. Mr. Lawson, you'll sign in the presence of witnesses, and we'll have it notarized before you leave this office. Richard looked at each of us in turn, perhaps searching for sympathy. He found none. Fine, he whispered. 2 hours later, the confession was signed, witnessed by Catherine and the wedding planner, and notarized by Morrison and Associates in-house notary. Patricia had been thorough. Richard had acknowledged forging trust dissolution documents, creating false property transfer deeds, lying to real estate agents and title companies, and attempting to sell property he didn't own. He'd agreed to pay $47,000 in combined legal fees and expenses. He'd signed documentation, acknowledging my sole ownership, and his complete lack of authority over the property. The wedding planner had left with a signed rental contract, Madison's credit card number, and a promise that I wouldn't interfere with wedding preparations, as long as the property was respected. Now only Patricia and I remained in the conference room. You went easier on him than I expected, Patricia said, packing her briefcase. Did I? I looked at the documents spread across the table. He has a felony confession in writing. You're filing it with the DA regardless, right? The DA will make the final call on prosecution, but yes, this confession makes any future attempts at fraud or financial manipulation impossible. It'll be on record. If he tries anything with your mother's assets, we have established pattern of behavior. That's what I thought. I gathered my own papers, and I get $15,000 for the wedding rental, which covers the legal fees I'll owe you. Patricia smiled. Smart business. Your grandmother would be proud. Will Madison hate me? Probably for a while. But you offered her the wedding venue, when you could have cancelled everything out of spite. That's more grace than most people would show. Patricia paused at the door. What are you going to do with the property long term? I thought about the Castellanos, about the August wedding referral, about the steady stream of requests I'd received over the years from people wanting to rent the beach house for events. I think I said slowly, I'm going to talk to a business attorney about converting it to a legitimate event venue. Weddings, corporate retreats, family reunions. Grandmother always said it was too beautiful to sit empty most of the year. Maybe it's time to share it, on my terms, with proper contracts and rental fees. And Richard gets to explain to Madison why her $2.3 million Malibu house gift evaporated. Why she's paying $15,000 to rent a venue her father promised her for free. Why everything he told her was a lie. I picked up my bag. That seems like punishment enough. The wedding 3 weeks later, I stood on the back deck of the beach house, watching Madison marry Trevor as the sun set over the Pacific. The cafe lights Richard had described were strung exactly as he'd envisioned, creating a canopy of warm light over 200 guests. The ceremony was beautiful. The wedding planner had done exceptional work. Madison had called me 2 days after the closing office confrontation. She'd cried, apologized, insisted she hadn't known about the fraud. I believed her. Richard had always protected his daughter from the messier details of his schemes. I still want to get married there, she'd said finally, her voice small. I know I have to pay now, and I know why, and I'm sorry, but it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen, and I've dreamed about this for months. Then let's make it happen, I'd said. Now Madison caught my eye, as she and Trevor walked back down the aisle, newly married. She smiled, tentative, uncertain, but genuine. I smiled back. Richard hadn't attended. My mother had, sitting in the back row, careful not to speak to me. She'd made her choice, standing by her husband, despite the confession, despite the evidence. I'd expected nothing less. The wedding planner approached as guests moved toward the reception area. This property is incredible. I have 6 clients who'd pay premium rates for a venue like this. Are you interested in referrals? Very, I said. Send me their information. As the reception began, I slipped away to my grandmother's old study, a small room overlooking the ocean that I'd converted into a home office during my visits. I pulled out the trust documents, reading my grandmother's handwritten note clipped to the front page. Emma, this house is yours because I know you'll protect it the way I protected you. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve what you've earned or inherited. You're stronger than they know. Love always, Grandma. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. DA's office called. Richard won't face prison time if he completes fraud counseling and pays restitution. But the confession stays on record. Your mother filed for separation this afternoon. I stared at that last sentence. My mother leaving Richard after 12 years of marriage, after choosing him over me countless times. Another text from Patricia. She wants to talk to you. I told her that's your decision, not mine. No pressure. Through the window, I could see the reception in full swing. Madison and Trevor's first dance, guests laughing and toasting, the ocean providing a backdrop of endless possibility. I thought about my grandmother, who'd worked 3 jobs to buy this property in 1987, when beachfront real estate was too risky, who'd maintained it through recessions and divorces and family drama, who'd loved me enough to protect my inheritance, even after her death. I texted Patricia back, "Tell my mother I'll call her next week, maybe." Then I returned to the reception, to the business I was building, to the property no one could take from me. Richard had told the wedding planner, I'd done nothing to earn this. He was wrong. I'd earned it by being the granddaughter of a woman who worked herself to exhaustion to build something permanent. I'd earned it by respecting what she built instead of trying to liquidate it for quick cash. I'd earned it by having the patience to let Richard's fraud play out instead of reacting emotionally. I'd earned it by offering grace to Madison, when spite would have been easier. I'd earned it by being nothing like Richard. As I watched Madison's wedding unfold in the house my grandmother built, I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, exactly, not even satisfaction, just quiet certainty. This was mine, it had always been mine, and no amount of fraud, manipulation, or family pressure would ever change that. The wedding planner found me again an hour later. I just had 3 guests ask about booking their own events here. This could be a serious business opportunity for you. I looked out at the property, the sweeping deck, the manicured gardens, the guest house, the private beach access, and saw not just my inheritance, but my future. Let's talk numbers, I said. 6 months later, Sanctuary Cove Events LLC was officially licensed and operating. I'd hired the wedding planner as my events manager. We'd hosted 12 weddings, 5 corporate retreats, and 3 family reunions. Revenue for the first quarter exceeded $200,000. Richard's fraud confession remained on file with the DA's office. He'd completed counseling and paid restitution, but the felony record meant he'd lost his sales director position. Last I heard he was working retail management. Madison and I had coffee occasionally, carefully politely, maintaining boundaries. Neither of us fully trusted yet. Trevor had gotten a promotion. They'd bought a modest condo in Long Beach instead of Malibu. My mother and I spoke once a month. She'd moved into a small apartment, taken a job as an office manager, started therapy. She apologized often. I accepted sometimes. Patricia had become both my attorney and my friend. She'd helped me establish the business properly, protect my assets, build something sustainable from my grandmother's gift. And every time I stood on that deck, watching the sun set over the Pacific, while someone else celebrated their milestone moment, I thought about what Richard had said to the wedding planner. She deserves a proper venue. You've done nothing to earn this. He was right about one thing. She did deserve a proper venue. They all did, and I'd earned the right to provide it.